Tony D and Little Joan, and this is a screenwriter's take. Oh, let me put down Joan. She's already out. A screenwriter's take on Luther, the Fallen Son. A pretty damn good movie. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Check out my books. The links are in the description. Comedy Horror in South Jersey. It's the Pineys, books 1 through 14, available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. So I think this came out about a year ago. And yeah, I was a big fan of the Luther TV show that was on the BBC. I don't think the episodes are running on Netflix, but you probably see them somewhere. I'm not sure where. But this movie was a follow-up to the series. Now, let me give you my non-spoiler review first. My non-spoiler review, it's a good movie. I would give it like a 9.5 out of a 10. Couple of flaws here and there, but for the most part, really holds up. Is a really a good sort of transition movie into a more movie version of Luther, for reasons I can't tell you without sort of spoiling the big surprises. It's got lots of action. The pacing is good. The acting's good. Lots of good acting in this. Lots of good dialogue. There's almost a little too much going on, which is one of the drawbacks. I knew a lot of going into it, what it was about, but even then it was kind of hard to wrap my brain around a little bit, although I was watching it and there was some amount of distractions. I maybe missed a couple of things, but I think for the most part it held up pretty good. It's the first act is definitely rock solid, and I'll tell you, the standout in this movie, Idris Elba is rock solid as always in this role. This role is built for him, but the guy really blew me away, and I was shocked. And it was the one thing that hesitated me to watch this movie was Andy Serkis. Now, I've met Andy, nice guy. I think he was great in Lord of the Rings. I think he's good as Caesar. I think in most of the other roles I've seen him in, I wasn't super impressed. I thought his MCU role as Claw was really over the top. But this, he nails this. This is the best I've ever seen Andy. This blows away even the Gollum performance, I think. He is so effing evil in this, and so effortlessly a villain with the stamina to go up against Luther. Really great performance by him. Just great. Can't say enough about it. He makes this movie. And I've always said, you know, in a movie like this, you need a great villain, and your best actor has to be in the villain role. And let me tell you, Andy is right on point. You know, he's almost super villain level, but he pulls it back enough that it's realistic, I think. There's a couple unrealistic moments towards the end, but those aren't on Andy, more on the film and a couple of things they could have maybe edited out that would have helped it along to make it more realistic, but you can overlook that, I think. I did. I mean, I certainly overlooked it. They're relatively minor considering the craziness that goes on in this film. And the great thing about it is there's lots of surprises. I mean, but you know, in some movies the surprises feel very inorganic. They're just there for shock value or to turn your head this way or that while the plot goes in another direction, or just to subvert your expectations. This movie, to me, clearly had a plan going in. So hats off to the creator of Luther, who wrote the movie, I believe. Was it Neil Cross, I think his name is? Great stuff. Great stuff. Really enjoyed it. So it says it's an epic continuation of the award-winning television saga reimagined for film. So I don't think... I tried to figure out the timeline on this. If you're a fan of the Luther series, he was a rogue private detective in London who had been a cop and then wasn't for various reasons. This feels like the origin story of Luther and how he ended up basically not being a cop and then ending up being a private detective to some degree, but then it kicks it up into a slightly different direction. And then it also feels like a sequel to the series, but even so, I'm okay with it because, you know, it's still Luther. A lot of the baggage from the show has just been essentially ignored. But quite frankly, I've forgotten a lot of it. It's been a long time. But I highly recommend the series, and I recommend this film. It's still currently on Netflix. I'm giving it an upvote on the trailer right there. There you go. What do you think of that? Andy really does make a great villain. Holy crap. Oh, Andy should be playing villains. I mean, we need a good villain guy. And to some extent, you could say that's Gollum and Caesar, although they're a lot more on the bubble there. You know, Gollum's more of a tragic figure. Caesar is sort of, yeah, he's kind of heroic in a lot of ways. But this guy, the guy that Luther goes up against, let's see if we got a still of Andy here. Oh, is he evil? Oh my God. The stuff he does in this movie is just freaking evil areas. See if we can get a front view of him. He is just super effing evil in this. Yeah, this was back in March. Man, I can't get a shot of Andy here. But yeah, this really feels like the origin story of Luther. So you could probably, in the timeline, I can't find a good shot of Andy. In the timeline, you could probably, again, start this movie. This happened first, and then the series happened after, in between what he's going to be doing in the future. And they teed it up for another movie, and they don't make another movie. They're crazy. Oh, they should definitely make another couple of movies. All right, that's my non-spoiler review. So we're going to get down into the nitty-gritty. I'm going to give you lots of spoilers. I'm going to spoil the whole damn movie. But we're going to break it down. The screenplay, which I think is pretty damn solid for the most part. I'm going to pick apart the ending, but so if you want to watch it, it's still on Netflix. So check it out. It's called Luther, the Fallen Sun, S-U-N, with Andy Serkis. All right. So, first act. Andy Serkis is crazy. And he is, at first you're not sure what he is. They don't really say, but eventually you just sort of figure out, yeah, he's a serial killer. I mean, from the description of the movie, you know it is. And he is super smart, of course. But more than that, Andy's performance, he delights in it. He loves it. He loves it. And there is a plan for the end of the movie in the third act. And when that comes together, you understand why he's doing all the things he's done. So I like that a lot. It has a good build. So Andy, when Luther is still a police officer, Andy kills a guy. Luther promises his mother that he will find the killer, and he sets out to do it. Andy, who's got millions of dollars, Andy's a serial killer, uses his millions to dig up every bad thing on Luther. Now, if you know anything about Luther from the TV series, you know he's very unorthodox, but he's a good guy, right? He sort of bends the rules a bunch of times in order to get the case and get the bad guy. So, as a cop on the TV show, he wasn't a cop on the TV show, but during the TV show, they would make reference to when he was a cop, and that he was constantly breaking the rules and constantly getting himself in trouble, which eventually got him kicked off the force. So, this is that. And so what Andy does, he exploits that. He finds out every piece of dirt on John Luther, and he gets him kicked off the force and thrown in jail for what he did. So, in the first act, Luther's been in jail for years, and Andy's continuing his murderous spree. At the same time, he kills a bunch of people in a spectacular fashion. Now, a bunch of these people, including this woman's son, were in the mix. And what Andy would do is he would capture them and not kill them right away. He would do horrible things to them online and then show it for money on like some dark web kind of thing. That comes out more a little bit later, but that's why he's doing all this. So he's horribly murdering people for sickos online who pay them an extraordinary amount of cash in order to view this stuff online and get off on it, I assume. So it's years later, and the woman gets a mysterious message to go to this house. When she gets there, she finds a bunch of bodies. I mean, this is a gruesome scene. She walks into this house and finds a bunch of people hung in this one room. And as she's there, horrified, her son is there. A bunch of other people show up, and they find their loved ones also hanging there. Then the whole house ignites, and Andy's outside, you know, getting off or laughing or whatever. And he dons an electronic mask. It's almost like a ghoul face he uses, which reminded me a little bit of Gollum. And you know, and he videotapes everything, right? So now Luther gets wind of this, realizes this killer is loose again, wants to get out of prison to help. Of course, nobody he used to work with wants to help him. Not really. Some kind of do, because he was a good guy. So then his plan is to basically break out of prison. And so the prison plan essentially is he's got to get himself transferred. And then he's going to get some guy to essentially break him out during the transfer. So in order to do that, he's a cop in a prison. Now, in the United States, my understanding is they always put the cops separate from the regular prisoners. I guess in England, they're too crowded or whatever. So what they do is they put Luther in, and he's a cop, and all the prisoners hate him, but they guard him most of the time and not very well. So he's constantly getting beat up and everything, which is kind of great because it's like the protagonist is doing all this suffering, right? So next, he basically starts a prison riot in order to force the prison officials to say, yeah, we got to move this guy because everybody wants to kill him. And that works. So they nearly kill him in the process, but he manages to survive. So then they're transporting him, and then a guy who owes him a favor, runs the car, the transport off the road, holds the cops hostage, and essentially kidnaps Luther and frees him. Now he's on the run from the cops, but he's after Andy. He corners Andy in Piccadilly Circus. Now Andy's got a plan to do this elaborate thing where he forces... Essentially, it's revealed that Andy's been blackmailing people to the point at which they'd rather die than have their secrets come out. So he's got a bunch of people willing to commit suicide rather than have their secrets come out or their loved ones be killed or whatever. So he's got them set up around Piccadilly Circus. At the same time, he's trying to use his old contacts to get information and solve the case, but they're after him too. So they all show up at Piccadilly Circus to capture John and Andy. And part of the reasoning is, well, we want to capture John, but we're going to let him partly solve the mystery so we can capture Andy. So then that goes off, and that's a crazy scene with people falling off of buildings and cars crashing into each other. It's done really well. And because of that, because it's so chaotic, Andy and Luther get away in the chaos. And they even use like the CCT cameras, and the facial recognition stuff, which I was like, yeah, when are they going to do that? And boom, it just showed up. So this is all, we're in the second act at this point. First act is a prison break, really. And then the second act is him chasing down Andy. So in the confrontation with Andy gets away. Luther gets stabbed. Luther has to stop to save a cop who Andy stabs. The cop tells him go ahead because he knew him when he was on the force. So Luther goes. I don't know if he was a guy from the show or not, but long story short, he dies. But Luther's able to get away thanks to him. Eventually, Andy kidnaps the daughter of the police captain who's been in charge of the investigation since the beginning, and she gets blackmailed by Andy to kill Luther. She goes to kill him. Luther convinces her, no, don't kill me, we'll take him down together. And then we get into the third act. Now this is where it kind of goes off the rails a little bit. The idea is that Andy is setting up what's called a red room, which essentially is like a dark web version of murder snuff films online for people who are just sick in the head and willing to pay exorbitant fees to watch live murders and vote whether or not, oh, do we kill this guy or what do we do to him, kind of thing. And Andy's character is like representative of that, and he's like working it like, well, they want to attack us, but we are just living our best lives, kind of thing. And then he blames the cops and he blames Luther for trying to ruin their fun, essentially, of murdering people. And so they're up in Norway. Now, they barely mention that from what I took from the film, but then they had to drive all the way to Norway in order for the final confrontation to happen. So Andy's base is up in Norway, and that's where he's got the daughter. And so the final confrontation happens with the police captain, Andy, Luther, the daughter, and Andy's assistant. So Andy didn't do it all by himself, which also made more sense in the movie. So the final confrontation goes down, and it's pretty action-packed. There was a little bit, I don't know, too much. I didn't like the fight between the police captain and Andy's assistant. Could have been a little better, but it was okay, kind of acceptable. Two women, a teenager and her mom fighting off this dude who I assume was like a murderer like Andy and would have just put him down, or I don't know, it needed one more step in the process, that like he gets distracted or she stabs him in the foot or something, but they didn't really do that. It was just sort of like a struggle by attrition. There was also a scene where she's forced to stab Luther to please Andy, and then Andy lets Luther up so he can tie down the police captain and then force Luther to break her kneecap. He, of course, refuses to do it, and then eventually the fight is on. So I think it probably could have been a little more clever, but I was okay with it. It was just very grueling, that whole scene. And then becomes a race against time. Luther goes after Andy. The assistant fights the police captain in this room where it's raining kerosene out of a sprinkler system, and then there's a hot kind of filament that's going to ignite it if they're not careful. And then it does eventually ignite, but of course the two women are just out of its zone, but the henchman gets burned, and they also have a fire hose, and they're fighting the fire while it's like burning out of the ceiling. It was a bit clunky, but again, I was okay with it because it was like this intense thing. Because in between cutting to that, they're cutting to Luther and Andy fighting in this Jeep in Norway. Eventually the Jeep crashes into icy cold water where Andy has thrown a ton of bodies, which was very creepy scene. And he tries to get out of the water, but ends up drowning, and then along with all the other bodies around him. So, it was very visual. And then the one super unrealistic thing was, Luther had alerted the cops, and then the cops show up just in the nick of time to save Luther from the bottom of the lake inside the Jeep, just as he's drowning, and save him. That was the most unrealistic thing. But then there's the epilogue. So then the epilogue is, you think Luther's going back to prison, but instead they take him to a safe house and essentially offer him a job in the government. So remember that Idris Elba was being offered James Bond right around the time this movie came out, or they were talking about it, and then he made an allusion to, well, I may have already sort of done that, and this is what it is. So they, instead of making him James Bond, they essentially made Luther a kind of James Bond, a more realistic, gritty one. I think it could work. I mean, I do. I think they could turn him into Black James Bond as Luther. That makes a hell of a lot more sense for a lot of reasons. First off, number one, it works. Like, Idris is good in a role as Luther. Luther could definitely make that sort of transition. They've set it up that way, that he's going to transition into like some sort of a government agent role, because he's essentially proved to the government that he can break out of prison and solve a murder. And it's an elaborate international conspiracy to some degree, because Andy and his cohorts speak, I don't know, I guess it was Russian? Was it Russian or Ukrainian? I wasn't sure. And so he's clearly part of some foreign network, besides being a serial killer. But so this is just the beginning in a lot of ways. So I would like to see another Luther movie. And I would definitely like to see it kicked up to the next level, where he's an MI6 guy with no past or whatever, instead of a cop, and now he's international intrigue, that kind of thing. Not quite James Bond, not like over the top James Bond like we've had, but you know, a guy using his detective skills, but also that's a police captain, that's the daughter, and that's Andy. But also, and there's his funky mask, electronic mask. So, but also, you know, he's got detective skills that, you know, a little more street fightery. So I like it. Oh, there's Andy. There's a good shot of Andy. I don't know what they're going to do for the next film in terms of a villain, but Andy almost makes it into a super villain role. I mean, he's this close to giving a speech at the end. He kind of does, really. But, like, he's also, because he's doing this crazy, you know, red room serial killer guy, he's not quite the super. He doesn't have the ambitions past that, but that it is some money-related thing. So I did like that angle of it for the villain, because, you know, it wasn't just that he was going to murder people and he's crazy, but he's also looking to make a big pile of dough so he can just keep doing whatever the F he wants. So his performance really is a tour de force. It's going to be tough for them to find a villain that's going to match John Luther for another one. I can't even think of an actor off the top of my head. Maybe Liam Neeson. That would be a good one. He'd be good for it. He's a little bit up there, but you can have a guy who's up there to be the villain. There's a few others that I'm sure the BBC could pull out of mothballs that would be good. On the American side, I'm not sure right now, but I definitely would like to see a big name veteran actor. I always do. A big name veteran actor in the role of the villain, because you need your best guy to make the hero look good. Because if you got gravitas and you got, you know, you look like a smart guy, and the script is good. The script here is great, for the most part, other than those things I mentioned. But again, I was willing to overlook them. The pacing covers some of it, and some of it's just like, well, you know, he's gonna live, so what the hell. So if you're a fan of Luther, I think this is a must for you. Yeah, Dermot Crowley returns as Martin Schenk. I believe he's Luther's old boss, so he was from the TV show. And I think the police captain was. Andy definitely was not. I don't think the daughter was in it. But they describe Andy as a cyber psychopath, and that's relatively accurate. So, yeah, it worked out good. So, again, I would highly recommend this movie if you like thrillers with a little bit of action and detective. My only other criticism might be I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of John Luther's human side. Like, we didn't get much about him other than he was a cop and then he got sent to prison. They kind of glossed over his background. Like, he's got no family, but on the TV show he had friends that he had helped. Now they kind of make allusions to that in the movie, in that you have that one cop who gets stabbed who tells Luther to go because he remembers him from a previous case and knows that he's a good guy. So they do hint at that, and then Shank is one of those guys too. It's like Luther is like the Shadow. He has agents everywhere kind of thing, but it's just because he's a nice guy and he helps people. And I like that aspect of him. So it'll be very interesting to see if the making him like an MI6 guy or whatever he's going to be can translate that whole sort of nice guy network, while at the same time having an international threat, but at the same time personalizing it enough that we can kind of get behind it and say, ooh, that's his friend. Don't kill his friend. But we'll see what they do in the next one. I personally am looking forward to it. So that's it. It's on Netflix now. Luther, The Fallen Son. And that's it for me, Tony D. Little Joan somewhere in the house. Thanks for tuning in. I will be doing the live stream today. It turned out the weather went to hell in Mattawan. So the Mattawan event has been postponed to July 7th. This is the second. My whole weekend was postponed to July. But that's okay. Fortunately, I had enough events this week. So look for the live stream at the normal time. 7 o'clock on the dot. Hope to see you there. We'll see you in the next one.